He took the life of a prison guard and spent decades in complete isolation. Lights on 24/7, no contact with anyone. A respected doctor turned out to be one of the most vile human beings in the history of the United States, and a high-level FBI agent was secretly feeding information to the Russians. These are evil prisoners the FBI is trying to hide from you. Thomas Silverstein isn't just some criminal who ended up in a tough prison. He's one of the main reasons the whole Supermax system exists. Back in 1983, he took the life of a corrections officer using a weapon he'd somehow managed to hide, even while already being in a high-security facility. After that, the federal government decided that he couldn't be treated like any other prisoner, so he was given zero human contact. That lasted for 30 years. The FBI and the Bureau of Prisons built what you could only describe as a prison inside a prison specifically for him. For years, he sat in a basement cell in Atlanta before they eventually moved him out to Colorado. His cell was roughly the size of a king-sized bed. The lights always stayed on 24 hours a day because they didn't want any chance of him using darkness to get the jump on a guard. He couldn't talk to other inmates. The only way he interacted with staff was through a steel mesh screen. When he died in 2019, he turned into something of a legend inside the system, not just because of what he did, because the government had managed to keep him in complete isolation for longer than a lot of people have been alive. If you look into the history of the 1993 World Trade Center incident, you'll find Ramzi Youssef. He was a trained engineer who used everything he knew to build a massive explosive, load it into a rented van, and carry out one of the biggest attacks on American soil at the time. After it happened, he ran. The FBI spent years chasing him across multiple countries before they finally caught him in Pakistan. Once they got him back to the US, it became clear pretty quickly that a regular prison just wasn't gonna cut it. He's now in the most isolated part of ADX Florence, a section called Range 13. He's been placed under something called Special Administrative Measures, which basically means the government treats everything he says or writes like weapons. He has no media contact. Every single piece of mail goes through intelligence officers who are looking for anything suspicious. They're genuinely worried that even a regular-looking letter could have coded instructions buried in it for someone on the outside. His cell has a window, but it's angled in a way that you can only see the sky, not the ground. You can't see any other fences, it's just the sky. They've completely cut him off from the outside world. Michael Swango might be the most unsettling person on this list, and a big reason for that is how trusted he was. He was a doctor, worked at well-known hospitals, had a very good career, but everywhere he went, people around him started dying. He had a serious obsession with poisons and would give his coworkers and patients things that would make them violently ill or worse. The FBI eventually caught up with him after he tried to escape to Africa to keep practicing medicine there. Because of how completely he betrayed everyone's trust, being that he was a doctor, he ended up at the Supermax. He's not in the ultra-isolated wing like some of the others. He's in what you'd call the general Supermax population, which still means a concrete room with a sink and toilet built just right into the wall. There's not much information that comes out about his daily life because there's just not a lot to talk about. It's a miserable existence, one that he very much deserves. For more than 20 years, Robert Hansen pulled off something that sounds completely made up. I mean, this is real movie territory stuff here. See, during the day, he was a senior FBI agent. His job was to catch foreign spies, but at night, he was working with them. He handed over thousands of pages of classified information to Russian intelligence in exchange for diamonds and cash. Because of what he gave them, several American spies working overseas were found out. Some were unalived. When the FBI finally found out Hansen was the mole that they'd been looking for, they threw him straight to ADX Florence, into a cell where the chances of him passing along anything he still knew were basically zero. For years, he was one of the most quietly hidden prisoners in the entire country. He knew things about American security that couldn't be allowed to get out, so the government made sure he lived in total isolation. He wasn't allowed to have visitors other than his immediate family, and even those were monitored. He died in his cell in 2023. That's one of those cases where I'm like, surprised they didn't just kill him. Not that I'm saying they should have, but it's like, I don't know. I feel like, why not? Anyway, Larry Hoover, still a major name in Chicago. Even now, he built one of the largest criminal organizations in the country. At its height, we're talking tens of thousands of members and millions of dollars flowing through. But even after he went to state prison, the FBI figured out he hadn't stopped running things. He was using visitors to pass along messages and was basically holding meetings inside the visitation room. The federal government eventually stepped in and had him moved to the Supermax to cut all that tomfoolery off. And since then, his ability to communicate has been almost completely shut down. His legal team has spent years fighting to get him moved somewhere else, arguing that the level of isolation he's kept in is cruel and unusual, but the government worries that with the amount of power and influence that he has, if he were allowed to communicate freely, it would immediately have an effect on crime in the street, so he's kind of become a ghost.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Dennis Rader. Dennis Rader is more widely recognized by his chilling moniker BTK, an abbreviation which disturbingly describes his preferred method of killing. Rader's reign of terror spanned over 17 years in Wichita, Kansas, a time during which he took a perverse pleasure in his horrific acts, savoring the terror he instilled in the hearts of residents. Rader wasn't merely a man who committed heinous crimes, he was a sadist who reveled in his victims' suffering and the dread he inspired. His chilling letters to the police, where he arrogantly flaunted his crimes, added an extra layer of psychological terror to his spree. The letters served as a chilling reminder of his presence, keeping the community in a constant state of fear and uncertainty. These communications revealed a deeply disturbed mind, one that was not just content with the physical act of his horrific crimes, but also sought to manipulate and terrorize an entire community. Rader's pleasure in his cruel actions, his taunting letters, and the psychological torment he subjected Wichita to make the thought of this man walking free a very unsettling prospect, and one that will probably never come true, thankfully. In our number 4 spot today, we have Cleophas Prince Jr. In the shadowy realm of San Diego's suburban streets lurked a menacing phantom during the 1990s. Cleophas Prince Jr., at the time known as the Claremont Killer, turned the 90s into a real-life horror show. Over 9 dreadful months, he embarked on a relentless hunt, marking women as his prey in the seemingly serene Claremont neighborhood. To do this, he would either break into their homes when they least expected it, or sweet-talk them into some quiet, out-of-the-way spot. During his reign of terror, while the local news was all over it, the rest of the world hardly blinked. During this time, the stage of national and international press was captivated by other monstrous players such as Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy, which casted a horrific shadow that eclipsed the terrifying exploits of Cleophas. Thankfully, however, in September 1990, thanks to some top-notch detective work and breakthroughs in forensic science, they finally pinned the tail on the donkey. Cleophas Prince Jr., Mr. Claremont Killer himself, got nabbed. The courts threw the book at him, and now he is chilling behind bars for the rest of his days. No parole, no second chances. In our number 3 spot today, we have Pedro Rodrigues Filho. Also known as the Padrino Matador, he is a Brazilian serial killer who is believed to have killed over 70 people, mostly other criminals, in the 1960s and the 1970s. He had a very difficult childhood, as his father was a notorious criminal who actually really sadly harmed and killed his mother, and this of course had a profound influence on Pedro and his life. This experience is believed to have contributed to his violent behavior later in life. Pedro began his crime spree at a super young age, and he started with a horrific crime when he killed the vice mayor of his town, who he believed was responsible for the death of his girlfriend. He continued to kill other criminals, often targeting those who had previously wronged him or his family. Pedro was arrested in 1973 and was eventually convicted of killing 71 people. He is currently serving a prison sentence in Brazil and is known for his outspoken and unrepentant attitude towards his crimes. While I am sure we can all feel sympathy for the things that Pedro experienced in life, it truly is no excuse for the things that he chose to do. In our number 2 spot today, we have Charles Ng. Charles Ng is a name that will send chills down the spine, and he was a key player in the reign of terror that unfolded in the 1980s. Alongside his equally terrifying accomplice, Leonard Lake, Ng played a significant role in a series of crimes that remain etched into the annals of criminal history for their sheer depravity and cruelty. The grim saga began when Ng and Lake joined forces to unleash a wave of horror that would haunt their victims and the public alike. Their modus operandi was chilling, unsuspecting individuals would be lured into their grasp only to be subjected to unimaginable torture, their final moments filled with fear and agony. What made their reign of terror even more horrifying was the duo's penchant for recording their despicable acts. These videos served as a chilling testament to their inhumanity, a grotesque spectacle of their victims suffering under their hands. Ng's role in these crimes was not that of a mere spectator, he was a very active participant, his cold-blooded nature making him a figure of dread. This, combined with his seeming indifference to the pain and suffering of his victims, made him one of the most feared inmates in the prison system. His heinous acts have left a dark stain on his name, making Charles Ng a prisoner that many pray to never see free again. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz, a figure shrouded in infamy and widely recognized by his chilling moniker, the Son of Sam. He struck fear into the heart of New York City in the late 1970s. His name became synonymous with a wave of terror that swept through the city as he embarked on a series of shootings that left the public in a state of constant fear and uncertainty. Berkowitz's crimes were not random acts of violence, they were methodically planned and executed with a chilling precision that left the authorities baffled and the public on edge. Each attack added to the growing panic, creating an atmosphere of dread that permeated the city. But it wasn't just his crimes that made Berkowitz a figure of terror. His claims of demonic possession added a layer of horror to his already frightening persona. These claims, whether true or the product of a deranged mind, painted a picture of a man under the influence of dark forces, making him an even more unsettling figure. The combination of his heinous crimes, alleged demonic possession, and erratic behavior made him a prisoner that one would fervently pray never walks free again.
The Aryan Brotherhood is one of the most violent groups operating within the prison system. Tyler Bingham was one of the people running it. In the early 2000s, the FBI launched a massive racketeering case against him, exposing how he used coded messages, sometimes written in invisible ink, made from citrus juice, to order hits on other inmates across the country. So clearly, regular prison wasn't enough. He got moved to the Supermax. He now lives in what's called a control unit, which is a part of the prison designed for people who can't be trusted around even other inmates. Everything he touches gets checked, and everything he writes gets read by people looking for hidden messages specifically. So he now spends 23 hours a day in a single room. Zacharias Musui is usually described as the person who would have been the 20th hijacker on September 11th. He wasn't on any of the planes that day, but he was involved in the planning and was in flight training at the time. His trial was pretty chaotic. He shouted during court proceedings, tried to get rid of his own lawyers, but once the sentencing happened and the cameras left, he completely disappeared into the federal system. He's held at ADX Florence under some of the most extreme communications restrictions in the country. He has no contact with the general prison population. The government is so concerned about his potential to inspire people that they've cut off almost every avenue that he'd use to spread any kind of message. Unlike some of the bigger names on this list, who at least got, a news mention every few years, this guy has been almost entirely wiped from public view. Eric Rudolph was genuinely hard to catch. After the 1996 Olympic Park attack, he ran into the mountains of North Carolina and survived out there for 5 years. He knew how to live off the land, how to stay hidden, how to steal what he needed without being seen. To some extremist groups, that made him look like some kind of folk hero. When the FBI finally found him, though, he was digging through trash behind a grocery store. And they knew exactly where he had to go, the Supermax. It's basically the opposite of everything that he thrived in. Instead of the open air of the Appalachians, he's surrounded by 4 concrete walls. And the FBI watches everything he sends out, because in the past, he tried to write essays that justified his actions and stuff like that. They see him as someone who could push others toward extremism, so they use the prison's communication rules as a way to make sure his voice does not reach anybody. El Chapo, he needs no introduction. For a long time, he was the most wanted person on the planet. He became famous for getting out of 2 high-security Mexican prisons, once in a laundry cart, once through a tunnel that was over a mile long and had a motorcycle track built into it. When the US finally got him extradited, both the FBI and the DEA were determined to make sure that he was never a free man again. He's now in ADX Florence, and the life he's living now is about as far from his old world as you can get. It's a small cell, single narrow window slit, no exercising with other inmates. His outdoor time happens in a small cage that lets in a little bit of fresh air, but nothing else. His lawyers have filed complaint after complaint saying the isolation is breaking him down physically and mentally, but first of all, I think that's the whole point, but anything less than total lockdown would just allow him to keep running his operation from the inside. Plus, he's just far too crafty. It was a huge operation, but here's what made him different from pretty much everyone else on this list. While all that was happening, he was also working as a top-level FBI informant. The feds weren't just aware of him, they were actively covering him while he took out his competition. Some of the agents who were supposed to be stopping people like him were basically running protection for him instead. When all of that came out, Bulger ran. He stayed off the grid for 16 years and climbed all the way to the top of the most wanted list. They finally found him in an apartment in Santa Monica, California. And that's when the government's real headache started, because Bulger knew everything. He knew which agents had helped him. He knew which cases had been buried. He knew where actual bodies were hidden and who put them there. Having him sit in a courtroom or a prison cell where he could start talking, that was a nightmare scenario for a lot of people still inside the system. So he got moved around constantly. Every day he was alive was another day someone powerful was nervous. It all ended in 2018. He got transferred to a facility in West Virginia, and within hours of arriving, he was whacked by other inmates. And it's pretty obvious why. See, that's how I figure that these government types would deal with something like that, you know?
This list, in our number 10 spot, we have Jason Barnum. Jason Barnum, also known as Eyeball due to his tattooed right eye, is a figure who has gained notoriety for his life of crime and distinctive appearance. Born in Alaska, Barnum's life took a dark turn as he succumbed to a struggle with addiction and criminal activities. In 2012, Barnum's life of crime culminated in a series of events that would land him in a maximum security prison. He was involved in a string of burglaries, car thefts, and a shooting incident with the police that left an officer injured. His actions during this crime spree demonstrated a dangerous disregard for human life and the law. During his court proceedings, the judge, while acknowledging Barnum's difficult upbringing and struggles with addiction, sentenced him to 22 years in prison for his crimes. In our number 9 spot today, we have Alexander Pichushkin. Alexander Pichushkin is a figure of terror known by the spine-chilling epithet, the chessboard killer. His goal, as horrifying as it was unique, was to take a life for each space on a chessboard, a total of 64 individuals. This chilling ambition set him apart from other criminals and made him a feared figure not only in his operating base of Moscow, but also around the world. Alexander's reign of terror was marked by a level of brutality that left a trail of carnage in his wake. His victims were not merely killed, they were subjected to violent deaths that really showed the depth of his ruthlessness. The authorities eventually convicted him for 48 killings. However, Pichushkin himself claims a higher count, insisting that his total stands at 60 victims. Whether this claim is the truth or an attempt to inflate his notoriety remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that the sheer scale of his crimes, coupled with his terrifying goal, makes him a figure of dread. His chilling ambition and the brutal reality of his crimes make Alexander Pichushkin a prisoner whose release would be a nightmare come true. In our number 8 spot today, we have Richard Lee McNair. Richard Lee McNair is a name that has become synonymous with cunning escapes and audacious evasion. Convicted for killering and burglary in the 80s, McNair's story took a turn for the extraordinary when he demonstrated a knack for escaping prison. Not once, but 3 times. His most infamous escape was from a maximum security prison in Louisiana in 2006. In a plot that seemed straight out of a Hollywood movie, McNair slipped out of the prison work detail by mailing himself out of the prison in a crate. Once outside, he managed to evade capture for over a year, leading authorities on a nationwide manhunt. McNair's ability to charm and deceive, coupled with his physical fitness, made him a formidable fugitive. His escapes and subsequent recaptures were widely covered in the media, earning him a reputation as a real-life escape artist. Finally captured in Canada in 2007, McNair is now held in the Supermax prison ADX Florence in Colorado. His story serves as a chilling reminder of the lengths some prisoners will go to regain their freedom. Richard Lee McNair is undoubtedly a figure you pray never escapes again. In our number 7 spot today, we have Terry Nichols. Terry Nichols is a name that sends chills down the spine of anyone familiar with the horrific Oklahoma City bombing. Nichols, along with his accomplice Timothy McVeigh, orchestrated one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. On April 19, 1995, a truck exploded outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people and injuring hundreds more. Nichols, a former army buddy of McVeigh's, was deeply involved in the planning and preparation of the attack. His anti-government sentiments and extremist beliefs fueled his participation in this act of terror. Following the attack, Nichols was quickly apprehended and brought to justice. In a trial that gripped the nation, Nichols was convicted of conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, as well as other charges relating to the seriousness of his crimes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole and is currently held in the ADX Florence maximum security prison in Colorado, the same one we just talked about. In our number 6 spot today, we have Gary Ridgway. Gary Ridgway is a name that evokes a chilling sense of dread and is notoriously known as the Green River Killer. This ominous moniker stems from his gruesome modus operandi, which involved leaving the bodies of his victims along the Green River in Washington. The river, once a symbol of natural beauty, became a grim reminder of Ridgway's merciless killing spree. Ridgway's crimes were not sporadic instances of violence, but a series of premeditated killings that made him one of the most prolific serial killers in history. Officially, he was convicted of 49 crimes, but the actual number of his victims is believed to be at least double that count. What made Ridgway even more terrifying was not just the scale of his crimes, but also his attitude towards them. In a chilling display of lack of empathy, Ridgway confessed his crimes without any visible signs of emotion or remorse. This cold-blooded confession provided a terrifying insight into the mind of a remorseless killer, revealing a man devoid of any empathy or guilt for his heinous actions. The enormity of his crimes, coupled with his emotionless demeanor, makes Gary Ridgway a prisoner whose release would be a horrifying prospect. His chilling legacy continues to haunt those familiar with his story, making him a figure whose freedom is preyed against.
Starting off our list today, we have Christopher Scarver, the man who in 1994 took the life of none other than Jeffrey Dahmer while serving time at the Columbia Correctional Institute in Wisconsin for killing a man named Steve Lohman in 1990. The pair arrived at the prison around the same time, and right away Scarver detested Dahmer. But he was also kind of scared of him. I mean, I really don't blame him. Dahmer did kill 17 people and consume the body parts of a number of his victims as well. So yeah, Scarver kept his distance. Until one night when he, Dahmer, and another inmate by the name of Jesse Anderson, who was jailed for killing his wife, were made to clean the bathrooms of the prison, during which time Scarver went to grab a mop, and when he returned, he saw Anderson and Dahmer laughing. He snapped and he grabbed a metal bar and he struck Dahmer twice, and then he beat Anderson both to death. In an interview, Scarver later claimed that he had become repulsed by Dahmer's behavior, his jokes, and the way he often organized his food to look like a human body in the prison cafeteria. After killing Dahmer and Anderson, Scarver was given 2 more life sentences. Next up, we've got James Elliott, who on March 18th of 2017 beat Donald Harvey, aka the Angel of Death, to death inside of Harvey's own cell. So, who is James Elliott and who was Donald Harvey? Well, James Elliott was a burglar, and Donald Harvey was a serial killer who worked as a nurse's aide and often smothered his victims to death with pillows. While Harvey claims to have killed around 70 people, he was only ever convicted of killing 37, which is not a small number by any means, but of course Harvey claims it was more, as they always do. Anyways, in March of 2017, Elliott entered Harvey's cell and beat him inches away from death. Harvey later died of his injuries, and Elliott confessed to killing him, claiming that he had wanted to do something constructive for the friends and neighbors he had stolen from, and that he had also wanted the attention of prison officials because he was unhappy with the quality of life in the penitentiary, as were many other of the inmates there. The act was premeditated, and Elliott was given a life sentence for killing, which was a big step up from the time he was serving for burglary. Next up, we have Thomas Terrible Tommy Silverstein and Clay Fountain, who on the same day, separately, fatally attacked prison guards escorting them through the grounds of Marion Prison. Both events took place on on October 22nd of 1983, with the first attack being at the hands of Terrible Tommy, who had originally been arrested on charges of armed robbery but had since caused 2 other deaths behind bars. That day, Tommy was being escorted to his cell by a prison guard named Merle Klutz when another inmate handed Tommy a shank, which he then used to impale Klutz 40 times, killing him. Just 8 hours later, in the same prison, Clay Fountain was being transferred by Robert Hoffman and 2 other guards when he was handed a shank by a fellow inmate, which he then used to attack the guards. Hoffman managed to save 2 of them before being attacked himself, after which he made his way to his son, another guard at the prison, before dying in his arms. This was the first and only time that 3 officers were killed on the same day in the same prison in 2 separate incidents. After the attack, Marion Prison went into a 23-year super lockdown that consisted of strict prisoner confinement to their cells, and both Tommy and Clayton were placed into solitary confinement in soundproof cells where the lights were kept on for 24 hours a day. Next up, we have James E. Day, who took the life of fellow inmate Nathan Leopold, a former child prodigy who, prior to the spring of 1924, met a man named Richard Leob. Richard and Nathan quickly became close. So close, in fact, that rumors began circulating about whether or not the two had entered into an intimate relationship, although both men adamantly denied this. During their time spent together, both Nathan and Richard became increasingly obsessed with the idea of carrying out the perfect crime, and so on May 21st, they decided to give it a shot. They forcibly took a young man from his home, killed him with a chisel, and then disposed of his body. They then sent a ransom note to the man's parents, who had at that time already contacted police. The two were sentenced to life in prison for the killing, with an additional 99 years each for forcible confinement, while guards were ordered to keep Richard and Nathan, who had turned on each other very aggressively during the course of the trial, apart. They eventually ended up together, as they seemed to, and they even started a school while inside the prison. One night while Richard was showering, James Day came into the shower and he slashed him 50 times with an old-fashioned shaving razor. He claimed that Richard had made a pass at him, but considering the fact that Day had attacked Richard from behind, police believe that the true motive is still unknown. Now, usually at the halfway point, I try to keep things light, but today, that's not the case. On October 1st of 2011, 2 inmates worked together to take the life of a fellow inmate, Mitchell Harrison, in an incredibly gruesome and drawn-out way. Both perpetrators, Nathan Mann and Michael Parr, had been serving life sentences for killing when Harrison arrived at the prison to serve an intermediate sentence for the violation of a young woman. One night, presumably after discovering what Harrison had been booked for, Mann and Parr lured Harrison into their jail cell, held him down, and cut his throat using plastic cutlery and a razor blade. They then impaled him in the eye with a pen before removing his internal organs. The two had plans to share in eating Harrison's liver, but decided against it when met with the organ face to face. In the past, Parr had alluded to fantasies of eating parts of another human, but it seems as though when actually given the opportunity, he decided that it likely wouldn't be all it was cracked up to be. That's disgusting.
When people talk about the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, the name Timothy McVeigh is usually the one that comes up first, but McVeigh did not act alone. Terry Nichols was the guy behind the scenes who made the whole thing possible. He wasn't the one who parked the truck, but he was the logistical expert who spent months gathering supplies and helping to mix the explosives. After he was caught, a jury couldn't agree on a death sentence, so he ended up with 161 consecutive life sentences. Today, he lives at ADX Florence. His cell is tiny, he spends 23 hours a day inside it, he doesn't get to see other prisoners, and his access to the outside world is almost entirely cut off, and rightfully so. In late 2001, just a few months after the September 11th attacks, a man named Richard Reed boarded a flight from Paris to Miami. To the other passengers, he just looked like a tall, slightly unkempt guy in a bulky coat, but halfway across the Atlantic, a flight attendant noticed him trying to strike a match. When she looked closer, she realized he was trying to light a fuse sticking out of his sneaker. Turned out he had hidden plastic explosives inside the hollowed-out soles of his hiking boots. Passengers and crew ended up tackling him and tying him down using belts and headphone cords, whatever they could find, before he could set it off. The FBI later found the explosives were sophisticated enough to have taken down the entire plane. The fuse hadn't been damp from his own sweat. Reed didn't just get a life sentence, he got 3 of them, plus another 110 years. He was sent straight to the Supermax in Colorado and put under special administrative measures. This means the government monitors every single thing he does. He isn't allowed to talk to the media, and even his lawyers have to be careful about what they repeat. The feds are worried that because he's so dedicated to his cause, he could use a simple letter or a phone call to send coded instructions to people on the outside. So he lives in a section of the prison where his window is angled so he can only see a small patch of sky. He's been in that environment for over 20 years now. In the world of the Chicago mob, James Marcello was as high as you could get. He was the boss of the Chicago Outfit, the same criminal organization Al Capone used to run. Marcello wasn't a loud, flashy criminal. He was quiet, he was cold, professional, he stayed under the radar for decades. He was finally brought down during a massive investigation in 2007 called the Family Secrets Trial. The federal government used a member of his own family to testify against him, which connected him to several hits from the 70s and 80s. When he was sentenced to life, the authorities didn't put him in a regular high-security prison. They knew that a man with his connections and money would be able to bribe guards or run his crew from a standard cell, so they sent him to the Supermax in Colorado, kept him in a unit where he has zero contact with other inmates. David Paul Hammer became a nightmare for the federal system because of how dangerous he was while already behind bars. Hammer was serving time for various offenses when he made 2 brief escapes in the 80s. Then he was moved to a high-security prison in Pennsylvania. While there, he managed to convince his cellmate, Andrew Marty, to participate in what he claimed was a mock training exercise for another escape. Instead, Hammer used a piece of homemade cord to end the other man's life. After that incident, he was sent to death row in 1998, but Hammer was a master manipulator who spent years playing with the heads of investigators who would claim he had secret insider information about the Oklahoma City, leading the FBI on long, expensive investigations just to see if he was telling the truth. He used these claims to get better perks in prison or to stall his legal proceedings, and when he strangled another inmate in 2018, he was moved to ADX Florence. He spent years in a tiny room with a camera watching him every single second. He died in 2019, having spent 40 years of his life in prison, the majority of which was in solitary confinement. Simon Trinidad wasn't a typical American criminal. He was a top leader for a guerrilla army in South America called the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC. This was a massive group that spent decades involved in intense conflict. The US government got involved after Trinidad's group took 3 American contractors into custody after their plane went down in the jungle. The FBI worked for years to get him extradited to the United States to face charges. Once they got him on US soil, they didn't take any chances with where they housed him. He was sent to the Supermax. The authorities believed that if he were able to communicate freely, he could give orders to his fighters back home. For years, his legal team complained that he was kept in such a state of isolation that he wasn't even allowed to have a radio or a newspaper in his native language. The government has basically made him disappear from the public eye. For nearly 20 years, a man known as the Unabomber lived in a tiny wooden cabin in the mountains of Montana. From there, he sent explosives through the mail to people he believed were pushing society toward a technological disaster. When the FBI finally caught him in 1996, they found a man who was a mathematical genius but also obviously very dangerous. He was sent to ADX Florence for life, and the government treated his mind like it was a loaded weapon. The feds were so concerned about his ability to influence people that they took extreme measures to keep him quiet. For a while, he was neighbors with other high-profile inmates, but when the guards realized they were actually talking through the vents and sharing ideas, the security was tightened even further. They didn't want Kaczynski to radicalize anyone else in the prison. He spent the rest of his life in a cell that was almost the exact same size as the cabin he lived in as a fugitive. The FBI made sure his writings stayed out of the hands of other prisoners to prevent his ideas from spreading. He wanted to change the world with his actions, so the government made sure that his world was limited to 4 concrete walls until he died in 2023. Most people on this list are here because they're violent, but Richard McNair is here because He's an escape artist. All started in the late 80s in North Dakota during a robbery that went sideways. McNair ended up taking someone's life and was handed 2 life sentences. Most people would accept their fate at that point, but not McNair. His first escape was almost like a movie. He used lip balm to grease up his wrists, and he slipped right out of his handcuffs at the police station and just ran. He was caught, but a few years later, he crawled through a ventilation duct to get out of a state penitentiary. His most legendary move happened in 2006, though. He was working in a prison warehouse where they repaired mailbags. Well, he managed to build himself a shipping pod with a breathing tube, hid inside it, and then he had himself mailed out of the prison on a pallet. After he got out, he was actually stopped by a police officer while running down some railroad tracks, but he was so calm and charming that he just convinced the officer he was a jogger out for a run. He stayed on the run for over a year, traveling all the way to Canada before the feds finally caught up with him. In the mid-90s, Kristen Gilbert was a nurse at a veterans hospital in Massachusetts. To the families of the patients, she seemed like a dedicated professional, but behind closed doors, she was using her medical knowledge to do something unthinkable. Gilbert had an obsession with the adrenaline of emergency situations, so she wanted to create them herself. She would inject her patients' IV bags with massive doses of epinephrine, a stimulant that makes the heart race. This would cause the patients to go into cardiac arrest, triggering a code blue emergency. At first, the other nurses didn't suspect anything sinister. They did notice that people seemed to pass away more often when she was on the clock, but they couldn't fathom her actually causing patients harm. They gave her the nickname Angel of Death, though, as a dark joke. But the more it happened, the less funny that dark joke became. It wasn't until 3 other nurses officially raised concerns about the high number of deaths and a shortage of epinephrine that an investigation finally started. And in that investigation, they finally found Gilbert responsible. She was eventually convicted and sent away for life. Krista Pike is one of the youngest women ever to be sent to federal death row, and when you hear about what she did, it's easy to see why. Back in 1995, she was only 18 years old and living in Tennessee. She became convinced that one of her classmates, Colleen Slemmer, was trying to steal her boyfriend, Tatterall Shipp. Instead of just dealing with the drama like a normal teenager, Pike recruited her boyfriend and another friend to help her carry out her deadly plan. They lured Slemmer to an abandoned area under the pretense of making peace, and then for over 30 minutes, Pike and Shipp attacked the girl. Pike was reportedly obsessed with the occult and dark symbolism at the time, and during all this, she used a piece of broken pot to carve a pentagram into Slemmer's chest. After taking Colleen Slemmer's life, Pike didn't even try to hide it. She actually carried a piece of her skull around in her pocket and showed it off to people at school. Not only did she have zero remorse, she was proud of herself. She was soon arrested and given the death penalty. And she's been sitting on death row ever since, and at the time of recording this, she's set to finally be executed in about 5 months. Denny Munoz Mosquera was the top hitman for Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel back in the 80s and 90s. The FBI ended up putting a massive target on his back after he was connected to the of Avianca Flight 203. The cartel had planted a device on the plane to take out a politician, but the ended up taking out everyone on board, 107 people in total. Since 2 of those people were Americans, the US government made it their personal mission to hunt him down. When they finally caught him in New York, he was hit with 10 life sentences plus another 45 years. Feds didn't just want him locked up. They wanted him somewhere he couldn't ever escape. Back in Colombia, Mosquera had already escaped from high-security prisons twice. The Bureau of Prisons knew that if there was even a tiny crack in the security, he would find it. That's why he was one of the very first guys moved to ADX Florence when it opened. Everything is automated, and it's controlled by computers, so there's no keys he can steal, or there's no guards he can get to. He's been in total lockdown for over 30 years now, and that's where he's gonna be for the rest of his days.
Okay, for this next one, I'm gonna switch things up just a bit because instead of an evil prisoner committing a crime in jail, this one is actually about an evil prison guard, or an evil group of prison guards, rather. You see, in 2009, a man named Rocrast Mack was arrested for attempting to sell $10 worth of an illicit substance to an undercover police officer. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 20 years in prison to be served at the Ventress Correctional Facility in Clayton, Alabama, which was built to house just 650 prisoners, but at the time of his incarceration was well over capacity, as it held 1,665. On the night of August 4th in 2010, during a nightly head count, a guard by the name of Melissa Brown accused Mack of partaking in some adult extracurricular activities with his hand under his blanket. You guys know what I mean. When he told her that wasn't true, she struck him twice with her baton, which led to Mack in turn hitting her in the lip. He then ran away but stopped when ordered to halt by another guard. He was then taken to the dorm lobby and surrounded by Lieutenant Mitchell Smith along with 5 other guards who took turns beating him into a coma, which eventually led to his death. Lieutenant Smith, who had been accused of brutality on at least 4 previous occasions, was charged with killing, as well as 2 other guards were also charged with killing who partook in the beating. What happened to the rest of them, I don't know, probably got off scot-free. You guys know how it is. Next up, we have Joseph Druce, who on August 23rd of 2003 killed a priest. Well, an ex-priest, I guess. You see, in January of 2002, Boston-born Catholic priest John Geohan was convicted of doing that stereotypical priest thing involving young men. Geohan was convicted on 1 count of the crime, but accused of 130. Not only that, but 86 plaintiffs also filed a $10 million lawsuit against the Archdiocese of Boston because of what Geohan had done. He was put into protective custody, but he still shared a cell, and with none other than Joseph Druce, a self-proclaimed racist who had been sentenced to life in prison after killing a man who had picked him up while hitchhiking. After claiming that the former priest had made a pass at him, Druce decided to block the door of their cell and then kill him by forcibly restricting his airways and then stomping him to death. Many people believe that the guards on duty actually turned a blind eye to the event, as when it happened there was only 1 guard on duty. There's usually 2, but that 1 guard did nothing to intervene in the situation. So it seems that they were not totally opposed to these actions. Next up, we have Robert Stewart, a violent prisoner with a past of psychological issues, violence, and racism. On March 31st of 2001, Robert was moved into the cell of Zahid Mubarak, who had been sentenced to just 90 days in prison for stealing just $12 worth of razor blades and was of Pakistani descent. That night, Stewart, who had already impaled another inmate to death and had records of over 186 incidents of violence acts since his incarceration, broke the leg off a table and beat Mubarak to death. After the incident, Stewart was moved into isolation, where he marked the symbol of a well-known hate group onto the floor before falling asleep 30 minutes later, showing absolutely no signs of remorse. An investigation was launched to look into whether or not the prison should be held responsible due to negligence, and protocols were then put in place for high-risk prisoners to avoid future incidents. Next up, we've got Jimmy Farah and Dennis Eversole, who in March of 1975 brutally killed fellow inmate Charles Schmid while serving time in the Arizona State Prison in Florence. Charles Schmid was a short man who often stuffed his boots with flattened cans and newspapers so that he would appear taller. He was sentenced to life in prison after violating and killing 3 young women during the 1960s alongside his accomplices, his girlfriend Mary French and his friend John Saunders. Jimmy Farah, one of Schmid's assailants, was in jail for killing in the 2nd degree and attacking someone with a deadly weapon, and the other, Dennis Eversole, for armed robbery. During the trio's time in jail, Schmid maintained a fondness for annoying other inmates, and so one day both Farah and Eversole snapped. They attacked Schmid, impaling him 20 times with a blade, causing him to lose both an eye and a kidney at the time, and his life just 10 days later. And finally, we have Fotios Frediguias and Paul J. Decalogero, who on October 30th of 2018 beat James Whiteley Bulger to death using a belt with a lock attached to it in the USP Hazleton prison in West Virginia, while a third inmate, Sean McKinnon stood watch. Freddie Gies was a former mafia hitman and Paul De Cologero a Massachusetts gangster. The pair killed Bulger likely after learning that he had been working as an informant for the FBI. Big no-no in prison. At the time of his death, Bulger had been serving a life sentence for killing 11 people as well as committing many other crimes in relation to the Irish Mafia. What's interesting about this particular case is that it hasn't actually gone to trial yet. Both Fotios, Freddie Gies, and Paul J. DeCologero are set to go to court in West Virginia in December of 2024, which is this year, so, you know, if you're interested, keep up on the case.
In our number 10 spot, we have Vicki Dawn Jackson. Vicki was a woman who worked as a nurse for a number of years. She first got her nursing license in 1989, but it wasn't until the 2000s when things took a seriously dark turn. Between December of 2000 and February of 2001, the hospital that Vicki was working for recorded a number of deaths that was unusual. It was a higher amount. Most of these patients were in the age range of 60 to 100 years old, and of course people just chalked this up to the advanced age of most of these patients, but a rumor began to spread that someone just might be responsible. After this, the hospital's administrator noticed that a vial of a drug called Mivacron had gone missing. You might see where I'm going with this. As it turns out, the person responsible was Nurse Vicki, and she had at least 10 patients whose lives she took by giving them too much of this missing drug. It was a muscle relaxant. Take in that this is 10 people between December and February. That is an unbelievable amount of people in a remarkably short amount of time. You might be wondering why she took these lives, and apparently she did it when she found these people rude, or quote, too demanding. In our number 9 spot today, we have Daniel Perez. Also known as Lou Castro, Daniel led a cult that was located on a 20-acre property in a rural area just north of Wichita. He convinced his followers that he had magical powers, and he told them all that he was a centuries-old angel who needed to commit some horrific crimes in order to stay alive. These crimes would have certainly been more than enough to throw him on this list, but he of course couldn't just stop at committing one type of crime. He had to make sure he really stole the show on just being the worst. Basically, he had the really clever idea to use his followers' life insurance policies to live a lavish lifestyle, like as if no one would think that's weird or suspicious. While some of these life insurance policies were collected through regular means, of course that kind of greed only leads to evil things, which of course means that he ended up taking one of his followers' lives so that he could collect the cash. It is thought that he also contributed to the deaths of some of the other people's life insurance policies he cashed in on, but unfortunately there was never any evidence that would be able to substantiate that claim. Despite this, however, on April 21st, 2010, authorities were able to arrest Daniel, and he was charged with 28 felonies. In February of 2015, he was convicted on all counts and received a sentence of 80 years in jail, where he remains. In our number 8 spot today, we have Chester Turner. Chester is an American serial killer who, on April 30th, 2007, was convicted of taking the lives of 11 women in the Los Angeles area, and on June 19th, 2014, he was convicted of 4 more that they were able to tie back to him. He has been referred to by prosecutors as one of the most prolific serial killers in the city's history, and if you know Los Angeles' history, that says a lot. In his original trial that led to his conviction, Chester was sentenced to death, but at the following one in 2014, he also received an additional death sentence. In the end, like with a lot of these kinds of stories, DNA came to save the day and help authorities find out who was committing these horrible, horrible crimes. In our number 7 spot today, we have Michael Bear Carson and Susan Carson. This couple is not one that anyone would want to encounter. The stories of these two come from the 80s. They were married, and on the outside they appeared like just a couple of harmless hippies. We all know not to judge a book by its cover though. In the end, they would go on to become known as the San Francisco Witch Killers. Didn't know San Francisco had so many witches running around. Basically, together the pair took the lives of 3 separate people between 1981 and 1983. They started off by killing their roommate, who Susan claimed was a witch, and said that she was stealing her quote health, power, and beauty. They next killed one guy that they worked on a farm with because they said he was a demon, and the final person they took the life of unfortunately picked up the pair as they were hitchhiking, and they took his life because they claimed that he was a quote black witch, whatever that means. Essentially, they were just committing crimes against people that they claimed to be witches. The pair were each tried and convicted for each separate crime and are both serving sentences of 75 years to life, and of course neither of them have shown any kind of remorse for what they've done. In our number 6 spot today we have Samuel Dietman. Samuel is just one half of the pair known as the serial shooters. He, along with a man named Dale, were actively committing these crimes between May of 2005 and August of 2006, and basically they were arsonists who would randomly set fire to objects, but they would also drive around and commit random acts of violence, taking people's lives. In the end, a series of tips is what led investigators to identify the perpetrators of these horrible crimes, in particular one from a friend of Samuel who explained that Sam had actually confessed to some of the killings one night while drinking. In Dale's trial, he was sentenced to death 6 times, and his brother, who was later found out to have assisted in some of the crimes, was sentenced to 25 years. Samuel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dale ended up taking his own life while on death row, which is why this point mainly focuses on Samuel, who remains in prison. In our number 5 spot today we have Keith Hunter Jesperson, also known as the Happy Face Killer. After the body of his first victim was found, Keith had someone else actually claim to be responsible for his crime. You would think that this would have been his ideal scenario, but that was not the case. He wanted to be known for his crimes, so to help himself get media attention, he drew a smiley face on a bathroom wall hundreds of miles away from his crime scene, and here he left an anonymous letter where he confessed to the crime and provided proof. He didn't end up receiving a reply, so he decided to write more letters to the media and to the authorities, each signed with a smiley face. In the end, Keith was initially caught after he became the prime suspect in the death of his girlfriend at the time. Previously, his victims had been people that he had no connection to, so this was truly the mistake the authorities needed to catch him. Keith then admitted to his crimes, and while he has formally been linked to 8 deaths, he has confessed to somewhere around 185. Keith was tried and sentenced to life without parole for his heinous crimes, and he remains in prison at Oregon State Penitentiary. In our number 4 spot today we have Quincy Allen. Quincy Allen is a man who went on a crime spree between July and August of 2002, where he took the lives of 4 people. His crime spree was actually inspired while he was in prison serving time for stealing a vehicle. It was here that a fellow inmate decided to start recruiting others and told him that he could get him a job as a mafia hitman, and this is all that Quincy needed to be inspired. As soon as he was out of prison, he began practicing for his new upcoming career. Quincy started off his horrific crime spree on July 7th, 2002 by attacking a 51-year-old homeless man who was sleeping at the time. Luckily, this man was able to survive this attack. His crimes continued until he was arrested on August 14th, 2002. After his arrest and trial, Quincy received a sentence of death and is still on death row awaiting execution. His sentencing did not deter him from the criminal life, however, as in 2009, Quincy, along with another inmate, planned an attack on a correctional officer at the prison they both reside at. In the end, the guards had to use rubber bullets to subdue the pair. Quincy was intended to be executed on January 8th, 2010, but there was a stay of execution that was accepted, and as of July 26, 2022, Quincy's death sentence was overturned. In our number 3 spot today we have David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz, or the Son of Sam, is an American serial killer who terrorized New York from July of 1976 to July of 1977. He took the lives of 6 people and wounded 7 others, all while eluding the biggest manhunt in New York City history. He was one of those really arrogant ones who leaves the little notes for police promising to do it again, kind of like taunting them. Well, his arrogant self was caught for his crimes, and he was arrested on August 10th, 1977, and he was indicted. He confessed to all of his crimes and claimed that he was just obeying the orders of a demon that had manifested itself in the form of a dog that belonged to his neighbor. Okay. Sure. He was found mentally competent to stand trial, and he pleaded guilty to his crimes, which left him sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. He later admitted to making up the dog story, which we know, but he did say that instead he was a member of a violent satanic cult and his crimes were committed as a part of that. These claims were investigated, but no one has ever been able to confirm or deny these claims. In our number 2 spot today we have Sean Great. Sean is a serial killer who committed a series of crimes from 2006 until he was apprehended in 2016. Throughout his decade of criminal activity, it is thought that he took the lives of at least 5 people. In September 2016, Sean was arrested and later indicted for 2 killings, as well as kidnapping and harming a woman whose 911 call actually led to his arrest. At the same time, in another county next door, he was also being charged with 2 other deaths, as well as another one from all the way back in 2006. This final count from all of of those years ago was actually an unsolved Jane Doe case who had been unidentified for 12 years. When Sean confessed to this crime, he wasn't even sure who she was, he just said that he believed her name was Dana. On May 7th, 2018, Sean was convicted on 2 of the counts, and on March 1st, 2019, he pleaded guilty to 2 of the others, and on September 11th, 2019, he pleaded guilty to an additional count. In the end, he was sentenced to death and has remained on death row since that final plea and sentencing, and he is currently scheduled to be executed in 2025. In a very bittersweet turn of events, in June of 2019, that Jane Doe victim was finally able to be identified through the DNA Doe Project, and she was identified as 23-year-old Dana Nicole Lowry from Minden, Louisiana. It definitely can't bring her back, but there is a lot of comfort in knowing that her family finally received some answers. In our number 1 spot today, we have Glenn Stewart Godwin. In 1980, Glenn was working in California and wasn't really living a life of crime, so it's pretty surprising that in this year, he and his roommate decided to make a plan to rob someone they knew who was once a friend of theirs. Of course, things go awry and it turns into a botched robbery, and Glenn ends up taking the life of the person they were robbing. They then tried to blow up the crime scene to get rid of any evidence, but of course that didn't work and also just made them look even more insane. Both Glenn and his roommate were both tried and convicted for the crimes in 1983. This is not where the story ends. In 1987, Glenn tried to escape prison and failed, and this landed him at a higher security prison. At this new prison, he attempted escape again, and this time, he was actually successful. He fled to Mexico, where he tried, unsuccessfully, to be a part of the illegal drug trade. He was arrested again and sentenced in Mexico, and this is when American authorities began the process of getting him extradited. During this process, Glenn decided that it would be a brilliant idea to take the life of an inmate who was a member of the Mexican cartel, which very obviously slowed the process of extradition. This gave him time to plan another escape, which he did in 1991. And since then, he's been on the run.
Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy, aka P. Diddy. Celebrities just keep getting more and more disturbed by the day, don't they? This Sean Combs case is nuts. Diddy's never been a stranger to controversy, but these allegations dating back to the early 90s are just a whole other beast. First in 2017, a former personal chef of his named Cindy Rula made allegations of SA against him. Then Casey Ventura came out saying he was involved in human trafficking and SA. More and more things started coming out, all of it incredibly twisted. He'd apparently throw these big parties which some of his other rich and famous friends would attend and lure women to, and bad stuff would happen. Combs' home was then raided back in March, and a bunch of his electronics were seized, and on September 16th he was arrested and is being charged with trafficking and racketeering. He's also been denied bail as Judge Andrew L. Carter Jr. is concerned about witnesses being threatened or intimidated. With the mountain of evidence and people making allegations against him, it is not looking good for Puff. Rebecca Butterfield is known as one of Australia's most dangerous female prisoners. She first landed herself in prison in 1996. She was convicted of crimes related to illicit substances, breaking and entering, and property damage, but she didn't do a lot of time and was released, but things would just get far worse in the years to come. In 2000, she attacked her neighbor, who was trying to prevent Butterfield from harming herself, leading to a charge of grievous bodily harm. This resulted in a 3-year sentence, but while at Silverwater Women's Prison, she committed an even more serious crime. Butterfield attacked a fellow inmate, Bruce Lim Wars, brutally slashing at her with a blade and killing her. This earned her an additional 12 years behind bars, and later authorities deemed her too dangerous for society, adding another 5 years to her sentence. Butterfield has made it very clear that if she were ever released, she would kill again. In January of 2021, she appeared at the Supreme Court to seek her release, but her request was thankfully denied. Next we have Robert Maudsley, aka the Brain Eater, an English prisoner born in 1953 who's so dangerous he's been locked in solitary confinement since 1983. And with a nickname like Brain Eater, that's not all that surprising. In 1974, Maudsley met a man named John Farrell, who ended up showing Maudsley pictures of young people he had harmed. Maudsley ended up killing the depraved man, which of course landed him in court. He ended up being sent to a psychiatric hospital where he locked himself in a cell with a man named David Francis, tormenting him for several hours before finally taking his life. In all fairness, David Francis was also a complete scumbag whose crimes were along the same lines as Maudley's first victim, John Farrell. For this crime, he was sent to Wakefield Prison, where he would end up killing 2 prisoners on the same day in 1978. His original goal had been 7. Again, all these guys were pretty terrible people. Then a special 2-cell unit was built in the basement of Wakefield, where Maudsley has been kept ever since. He's only ever let out on occasion, and when he is, he's accompanied by several heavily armed officers. As for where he gets the Brain Eater nickname, he was rumored to have eaten part of the brain of one of his victims, although that very well may be an urban legend. Richard McNair may be one of the most dangerous and clever criminals in American history. It all started in 1987 with a botched robbery in Minnow, North Dakota. While attempting to steal from a home, McNair encountered 2 men. In the chaos, he fired at them. One man was severely injured, the other died. He was pulled in for questioning in February of 1988 and ended up confessing, but he managed to escape from the police station where he was being held. He was caught after a couple hours and handcuffed to a chair, but that didn't stop him. Using a lip balm, McNair slipped out of his handcuffs and fled for a second time, leading officers on a foot chase. He was recaptured shortly after and ended up receiving 2 life sentences for his crimes. Then in 1992, he made another escape from the North Dakota State Penitentiary with 2 other inmates. Again, he was caught just hours later, but his most infamous escape happened in 2006 while he was at a federal penitentiary in Louisiana. He managed to pack himself up and get mailed out of the prison. An officer ran into him just a few blocks away, but McNair managed to convince this guy that he was just a friendly jocker. And for 10 whole months, he was free, using stolen identities and even making his way to Canada. But in 2007, he was finally apprehended again. Will Richard McNair ever be let out of prison? I don't know, but it sounds like it's really just up to him whenever he feels like escaping again. We're going to start things off with Edmund Kemper. Yes, one of America's most notorious serial killers is eligible for parole this year. This guy has been labeled a naturally born killer. Not only does he stand at 6'9", weighing in at 250 pounds, but he also has a very high IQ. Mix that with a troubled childhood and a propensity to violence, and it's quite the dangerous concoction. He took the lives of his grandparents when he was just 15. About 10 years later, he killed his mother. Between May 1972 to April 1973, he took the lives of 8 women. He would lure women into his car, drive them out to secluded locations, and then smother and suffocate them. He'd then bring the bodies back to his home where he'd them. Kemper ended up receiving 8 consecutive life sentences for his crimes, but again, his next parole hearing is coming up this year. Now, I mean, it's very, very unlikely that anything will come of it. He's been denied parole at every other hearing pretty much immediately, or has even chosen to waive his right to a hearing himself. Next up, we have Robert Pickton, who recently became eligible for day parole and will be eligible for full parole in 2027, 25 years after his original arrest date. He hasn't had his hearing yet, but the families of his victims have already come out saying that Robert Pickton has no right to walk the earth after what he did. And yeah, you know what? I cannot with the sentencing that this guy was given. He received 1 life sentence. 1. Are you kidding? He killed at least 26 women. However, he claims it was 49 and actually complained to an undercover officer that he never got his even 50. He said he was angry, furious, and disappointed with himself that he never got the full 5-0, his words. And now he's eligible for parole? Like, what happened to consecutive life sentences or life without parole? It's honestly just insane. Why are there even talks about this? If you don't know who Robert Pickton is, he's a British Columbia serial killer who was active from the 90s to the early 2000s. He's often referred to as the pig farm killer because his MO included violating his victims before taking their lives and running their bodies through a wood chipper on his farm before feeding the remains to his pigs. I really don't understand how any judge in their right mind would or even could approve parole in this case. The crimes were just so gruesome and heinous. If anything, I feel like we should be adding time to his sentence, not taking it away. Next on the list, we have Paul Bernardo. Now, this name may not be super familiar to those outside of Canada, but this guy is one of the creepiest, most despicable criminals in Canadian history. And his latest parole hearing just happened in February. So, where do I start with this guy? He's a serial killer who would also his female victims, and his former wife, Carla Homolka, would often assist in his crimes. They earned the nickname the Ken and Barbie Killers, and one of their victims was Carla's very own sister. I remember when I first heard about the details of this case in law class in high school, I had this uncomfortable, just weird feeling for the rest of the day, possibly even a couple days after. I had this feeling like, man, who can I trust? Can I ever really know someone? It's incredibly disturbing how different these two's outward appearance and reputation was compared to the heinous things they were doing in secret, until of course they were caught. Well, Bernardo has had a number of parole hearings. He insists that he's changed and that he's no longer a threat to the public, but thankfully he's been denied every time. But then again, Carla she was set free in 2005, so honestly I wouldn't put it past them to let this guy go. Next up, we have Mark David Chapman, also known as the man who killed the Beatles, but more specifically John Lennon, peace activist and co-songwriter, co-lead vocalist and rhythm guitarist of the Beatles. Of course, on the evening of December 8th of 1980, John Lennon was returning to his hotel when all of a sudden he heard someone shout his name. When Lennon turned around, Chapman pulled out a handheld weapon and fired 4 projectiles into Lennon. 2 entered the left side of his back, which traveled through the left side of his chest and his left lung. 1 exited his body, and the other became lodged in his neck. The other 2 bullets hit Lennon in his left shoulder. John made it to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead soon after. It was a terrible day in history that brought the world together in grief and mourning. John Lennon was loved, and people were devastated at the loss. When Chapman was asked why he did it, he said that he wanted the world to know his name, but provided no other explanation. While he is eligible for parole, he has also been denied parole on 12 separate occasions, so I doubt he'll get it. Next on the list, we have Oscar Pistorius. Oscar Pistorius, known as the Blade Runner for his achievements in track and field despite having both legs amputated as a child, competed in the 2012 Olympics in London, but just 6 months later, he took the life of his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp. On the early morning of February 14th, 2013, Pistorius killed his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp, with a firearm, firing at her through a locked bathroom door in his home in Pretoria, South Africa. He claimed that he mistook her for an intruder and fired in self-defense, but the prosecution argued that it was premeditated. He ended up being convicted and with a maximum sentence of 15 years, but he was just released in January, his conditions being monitoring until his sentence expires and therapy sessions. Next, we have Susan Smith, who is despicable. After killing her 2 sons, she was charged with life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. And guess what? It's been 30 years. On October 5th, back in 1994, Smith had called police officers to report a carjacking. Not only that, but Susan claimed that her 2 sons were in the car when it was stolen. Smith went on television and pleaded for their safe return. But she was full of it. Susan had killed her sons because she had secretly fallen in love with a man who didn't want children, and she believed that doing so would solve her relationship problems. When police discovered her car, it was clear that it had been deliberately rolled into a lake with her sons inside. Smith's lawyer tried to plead mental insanity, but the argument didn't stick. In response to the idea of Susan Smith being approved for parole, one of her family members was quoted saying, "I don't think she's got a snowball's chance in hell." Good. So luckily this guy's parole was just recently revoked, but the story is pretty insane. So in 2000, Kenneth McKay met a woman named Crystal Paskiman at a bar in Saskatoon. He offered to give her a ride home that night, but she never made it home. Instead, McKay drove her to a secluded area her and took her life. Then he set her remains on fire behind his truck. Infuriatingly, he was granted day parole in 2023. Prison officials weren't happy about this, warning that there was a high chance he'd reoffend. And guess what happened? He started stalking a female coworker just 3 months after being released. Luckily, he didn't get to carry out whatever plan he had before being arrested. Next up, we have Jeremy Wade Vochkovic, who just 22 years ago committed a violent crime that ended the life of a woman in Maple Ridge, British Columbia, named Colleen Findlay. Vochkovic came into contact with a woman while trespassing on her property. He beat her, bound her, and then set her and her home on fire before fleeing the scene. The court saw his actions as deliberate and methodical, and despite the fact that Vochkovic previously a day parole he received in 2022, and despite the fact that a psychiatric assessment expressed grave concern about the level of risk that he posed to the public, he's been given a 60-day unescorted absence from prison so that he may participate in a substance abuse treatment program at a residential facility in Vancouver Island. While he does have to return to the treatment facility nightly and is not allowed to consume or possess alcohol or illicit substances, it is still absolutely crazy to me that he has been allowed to leave prison at all. This next guy has to be one of the most despicable human beings alive today. Luis Gravito. This Colombian killer was nicknamed La Bestia, or the Beast, and the name really fits. Between 1992 to 1999, this guy took the lives of over 193 young people. Very young, mostly males, and a lot of them lived on the street. It's very likely there's a much higher death toll on this guy's hands. Authorities have said it may be closer to 300. It's just never been confirmed. Not only did this evil prick take the lives of his victims, but he'd violate and torment them first. He would often pose as a priest or a monk in order to gain his victims' trust and lure them to their deaths. Police recovered a suitcase of his that contained journals detailing his crimes, as well as tally marks of his victims. It's incredibly sickening, and the fact that there were even discussions of this guy receiving parole recently should be a crime. He was originally sentenced to 1,853 years in prison, but Colombia law changed, and maximum prison sentences were reduced to 40 years. And because Gravito assisted police in recovering the bodies of his victims, his sentence was further reduced to 22 years. He was eligible for parole just recently, but thankfully was not released. And to finish us off today, we have a man who is not up for parole, but actually received it back in 1973. And this is a perfect example of why this list is so absolutely terrifying. So in June of 1956, Richard Marquette was arrested for killing and dismembering Joan Ray Cottle. He then scattered her body parts around the city of Oregon to be discovered by police. He was given a life sentence for his crimes, but received full parole after just 12 years. 12 years. The police and the courts had found him to be polite and non-argumentative. And so even though he had taken the life of someone in a horrific fashion, Marquette was allowed to walk in 1973 after spending just 12 years in prison. Just 27 months later, in 1975, Marquette killed and dismembered 35-year-old Betty Lucille Wilson before dismembering her body and dumping her remains in a marsh. When he was arrested, he admitted that he had in fact killed 2 women since his release and led police to remains of the second victim. He's now serving his second life sentence in the Salem State Penitentiary, and he is no longer eligible for parole.
And Paul Bernardo. He is a Canadian serial killer and more, who was dubbed the schoolgirl killer. Other monikers I can't say, thanks to the interwebs hating the R word. And together with his former wife, Karla Homolka, one half of the Ken and Barbie. Beneath his charming facade, he developed pyromaniac inclinations and dark sexual fantasies in his youth, one of which involved creating a virgin farm where he would breed virgin girls to take advantage of. Later in life, Paul was diagnosed with sadism, voyeurism, narcissistic personality disorder, and met the requirements for a diagnosis of psychopathy. So that checks. Between 1987 and 1990, Bernardo committed increasingly vicious serial crimes in and around Scarborough, attacking most of his victims after stalking them as they got off buses late in the evening. During this time frame, he met and got engaged to Karla Homolka, and that's when things escalated from crimes to, well, there are 3 notable I'm just going to talk about the one that disturbs me the most for time purposes. Although he was engaged to Carla, Paul had become obsessed with her younger sister Tammy, peering into her window and entering her room to get himself off while she slept. 6 months before their 1991 wedding, Carla stole sleeping pills from the clinic she was working at, and on December 23rd of 1990, Carla and Paul administered said pills to Tammy in a rum and eggnog cocktail. When Tammy lost consciousness, Carla and Bernardo undressed her, and Carla applied a halothane-soaked cloth to her sister's nose and mouth. Carla wanted to give Tammy's virginity to Paul for Christmas, since according to her, he was disappointed that he wasn't Carla's first sexual partner, and the duo also had a video camera on hand for the experience. You can't make stuff like this up. Tammy began to vomit, and they tried to revive her and called 911 after hiding evidence, dressing Tammy and moving her into the bedroom, but Tammy never woke up, despite being observed vacuuming and washing laundry in the middle of the night, and with the evidence of a chemical burn on Tammy's face, the regional municipality of Niagara coroner and Carla's family accepted the couple's version of events, that she had just choked on her own after consumption of, bad things. After Tammy's death, Paul and Carla videotaped themselves engaging in sexual intercourse, with Carla wearing Tammy's clothing and pretending to be her. Thankfully, nowadays, Paul is in jail for the rest of his life, but Carla's out in public, living alone in Salaberry de Valleyfield. Number 9 is Issei Sagawa. He is an infamous Japanese serial killer who was convicted in the 1980s for the killing and consumption of a fellow student. For reference, he was born into a wealthy family in Tokyo and studied at the prestigious Sorbonne University in Paris. In 1981, classmate Rene Hartevelt and was arrested the following day after police found evidence of people munching in the apartment, including traces of human remains in the refrigerator. Sagawa was charged with committing a and sent to a mental hospital for evaluation, where he was eventually diagnosed with a mental illness that caused him to act impulsively and without regard for others. He was eventually released from prison after serving just 2 years due to his mental illness, although he remains under constant supervision and has to check in regularly with his doctor. Despite this, he has become something of a celebrity in Japan and has published a book detailing his experience of the crime, his trial, and his time in prison. Technically, I know I'm cheating a little since he isn't in jail anymore, but with his condition and his past, I definitely won't want to run into him in public. Number 8, Eric Rudolph. So Eric Rudolph is an American extremist who was responsible for a series of explosives in the United States between 1996 to 1998. After dropping out of school in the 8th grade, he joined the United States Army and served as a paratrooper from 1986 to 1989. In the early 1990s, Rudolph became a militant anti-abortion activist and began constructing homemade explosives using instructions from the Anarchist Cookbook. In 1996, Rudolph targeted 2 abortion clinics in Birmingham, Alabama, and a gay nightclub in Atlanta, Georgia. He then attacked Centennial Olympic Park during the 1996 Summer Olympics, one person and injuring more than 100 others. All in all, Rudolph is believed to be responsible for 4 explosive events, resulting in the deaths of 2 people and injuries to more than 150 others. Following a massive FBI investigation, he was finally apprehended in 2003 after hiding out in the Appalachian Mountains for more than 5 years. In 2005, he pleaded guilty to the crimes and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He's currently serving his sentence at ADX Florence, a federal prison in Colorado. Number 7, Glenn Stark Chambers. Before his time in prison, 23-year-old Glenn was living with his 22-year-old girlfriend, waitress Connie Weeks, in Sarasota, Florida. The relationship seems to have not been ideal. Back in January of 1975, a policeman intervened to prevent Glenn from physically attacking Connie on the street during an argument when he already had her hair in his fist. The policeman, who was off duty at the time, arrested Glenn on the spot and called for backup to bring him to jail, but Connie bailed him out later that day. That same night, Glenn showed up at the Sarasota Memorial Hospital, carrying Connie in his arms, claiming she'd slipped in the shower. It was a stupid lie, and the doctors and nurses who tended to Connie phoned the police. She passed away in the hospital later that week, and a judge sentenced Glenn to the electric chair. Now, the young man attempted to escape almost immediately upon arriving in prison, attacking a guard with 2 accomplices and managing to climb out a window. Now, the first attempt didn't get very far, with all 3 men being caught, and a Florida judge added 5 years to Glenn's life term. By 1990, Glenn seemed to be turning over a new leaf, with his behavior over those 15 years being described as exemplary, and prison authorities gave him permission to work in a furniture construction shop, designed to give, inmates vocational training and a sense of purpose. On February 21st of 1990, he slipped into one of those boxes of furniture that was set to be shipped off the premises to a warehouse. No one noticed the extra weights as they loaded the crate onto the truck, nor did they notice, during the entire drive to Daytona Beach, anything shifting around in the back of the truck. Like no footsteps, no clunking lids, no sound of the back panel sliding open or dropping shut, nothing. Upon arrival, however, one open crate contained a discarded prisoner's uniform, and the Correctional Institute was, missing a man. No one has yet to hear from him again, and he has been allegedly spotted in Florida and Alabama, but not officially found. Number 6, Damian Fowlkes. He is an infamous prisoner who was convicted in 2002 of 2 women in England, and thankfully was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Now, Damien originally had a long criminal history and was known as a cold and calculating individual. To go into detail, he was found guilty of impaling one woman in her chest while she was sleeping, and then strangling the other with a ligature, before leaving their bodies in a disused pub. Damien was diagnosed with several mental illnesses, including schizophrenia, had an IQ of just 64, but was deemed to be sane enough to stand trial. During the trial, he admitted to 2 women, but claimed he did so in a fit of rage after being provoked. In 2013, Damien was also convicted of attempting to kill a prison guard by throwing boiling water over him. He's serving his sentence at HMP Wakefield, one of Britain's most secure prisons. There, he's been described as a cold-blooded and callous and is considered to be one of the most dangerous prisoners in the country.
Charles Cullen, often referred to as the Angel of Death, is perhaps the most prolific serial killer in American history. Will he ever be set free? Well, not until 2403 at the very earliest, so no. Born on February 22nd, 1960 in West Orange, New Jersey, Cullen grew up to become a nurse and found work at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey, and this is where the nightmare began. Cullen's first confessed kill took place on June 11th, 1988, when he gave a patient a lethal overdose of intravenous medication. By the time he left St. Barnabas in 1992, Cullen claimed to have taken the lives of numerous patients. Just a month after leaving, he started a new job at Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg, where he continued this spree, taking the lives of 3 elderly women with overdoses of a heart medication, and he didn't stop there. At Hunterton Medical Center in Flemington, Cullen caused the deaths of at least 5 more patients using the same medication. Wherever he worked, death followed him. Somehow his actions went unnoticed for years until he was arrested on December 12th of 2003. He'd only been implicated in 2 cases, but once in custody, Cullen revealed the truly staggering number of victims he was actually responsible for, claiming to have killed about 400 people. And his explanation? Well, he claimed he was helping his patients escape their pain. Joanna Dennehy is one of the most notorious female criminals in the UK. In March of 2013, 3 bodies were discovered in ditches outside Peterborough. In addition, 2 injured men were found in Hereford, but they survived. At first, investigators thought the attacker was a man, but turned out the perpetrator was a woman named Joanna Dennehy. Dennehy, along with her partner in crime, Gary Stretch, had a chilling plan to take the lives of 9 men, later claiming that they were doing it purely for entertainment. Dennehy would make it very well known, once she was apprehended, that she found killing to be oddly satisfying and felt an uncontrollable urge to continue after her first experience. In November of 2013, Dennehy pleaded guilty to her crimes and was sent to HM Prison Bronzefield. During her trial, she showed little to no remorse, even laughing at times during proceedings. She was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 19 years. Scott Lee Kimball is a convicted serial killer and fraudster from Boulder County, Colorado. Over a 2-year period, he killed at least 4 people, and investigators suspect him in up to 21 other unsolved cases. Kimball's criminal activities began when he was working as an informant for the FBI, which paid him and offered protection for his own legal troubles. Most of the info he provided the FBI turned out to be useless and false as well. Now, while running a legitimate business selling organic beef, Kimball was doing his fraudulent schemes behind the scenes. He forged documents, passed bad checks, which led to criminal charges in 4 Western states by 2003. His fraudster skills aided in his truly evil crimes, though, allowing him to create false evidence that his victims were still alive after he'd taken their lives. He even used their credit cards and bank accounts to continue his fraudulent activities after killing them. 2 of his victims were people he knew personally, the daughter of his 3rd wife and his own uncle. Some family members and investigators also believe that a 2004 car accident that severely injured his oldest son was actually an attempt to kill him for insurance money, but no charges have ever been filed for that incident. The investigation into a check fraud scheme in 2006 eventually led authorities to uncover his killings. Kimball ultimately pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 70 years for his crimes. This is Andre Barros, nicknamed Psycho. He killed 5 people in San Luis Valley area of southern Colorado in 2020. Barros was arrested and ultimately pled guilty to 5 counts of first-degree killing and 5 counts of tampering with deceased human bodies. He was also slapped with kidnapping charges. After taking the lives of his victims, he would dispose of them near the New Mexico border, dismembering and burning their remains in pits. In May of 2024, he was sentenced to life in prison, ensuring he will never be released. His brutal actions and the way he handled his victims make him just a prime example of a prisoner who should never be set free. Joseph James D'Angelo is known by a lot of names: the Creek Bed Killer, the original Night Stalker, the Diamond Knot Killer, and more. And luckily, he's exactly where he belongs: prison. He's a former police officer responsible for a series of horrifying crimes in California between 1974 and 1986. Born on November 8, 1945 in Bath, New York, he terrorized communities with burglaries, SA, and killings. D'Angelo would often break into homes, tying up and frightening his victims before tormenting and killing them. For decades, his crimes went completely unsolved, but in 2018, he was arrested thanks to DNA evidence that linked him to one of his crimes. In June of 2020, he pleaded guilty to numerous charges, and on August 21st, 2020, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Eric Rudolph is a notorious criminal known for a series of bombings across the United States, including the 1996 Centennial Olympic Park attack in Atlanta, Georgia. Born on September 19, 1967 in Merritt Island, Florida, Rudolph took the lives of 2 people and injured over 100 others in this attack. His explosives targeted not only the Olympic event, but also abortion clinics and a gay nightclub. Rudolph became a fugitive after the attacks, evading capture for more than 5 years. He lived in the wilderness of North Carolina, managing to stay hidden while law enforcement searched for him. In 2003, though, he was finally arrested after being discovered rummaging through a trash bin. In 2005, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
At number 6 is Daria Nikolvania Saltykova, commonly known as Saltychika. Born into a rich Russian noble family in the year 1730, Saltykova lived alone in her estate after the passing of her husband. You see, Saltykova had some serious connections in high places, rubbing elbows with the powerfully elite, but eventually the persistence of victims' relatives caught the attention of none other than Empress Catherine II. Saltykova was arrested and held for 6 years while authorities held a painstaking investigation which counted as many as 138 suspicious unalivings. After a public trial, Saltykova was found guilty of ending the lives of at least 38 female serfs through brutal beatings and torture. Eventually, she was sentenced to life imprisoned in Moscow, where she spent the first 11 out of 33 years chained in a basement dungeon without a window and only given a candle during meals. And number 5 is Robert Maudsley, aka Hannibal Lecter. The longest serving British prisoner in solitary confinement, had a troubled youth marked by violence, claimed to father. In the 1960s, he turned to night walking due to substance addiction and sought psychiatric help after attempting self-harm, citing disturbing voices in his head which urged him to assassinate his parents. He said that if he had, he would have never committed any of his future unalivings. In 1974, he strangled John Farrell, who had shown Maudsley pictures of his kidnapped victims. He turned himself in, leading to his institutionalization at Broadmoor Hospital. In 1977, Maudsley and another inmate brutally tortured and eliminated another inmate, resulting in another conviction and transferred to Wakefield Prison, where he brutally attacked and offed 2 fellow inmates, displaying extreme violence and earning him the nickname Hannibal the Anthropophage, because that's better somehow. Deemed far too dangerous, Maudsley occupies a 2-cell basement unit and is always escorted by 4 officers outside of his cell. At number 4 is James Marcello, aka Little Jimmy, aka Jimmy Light, aka Jimmy the Man. In April 2005, the spotlight shone on front boss of the Chicago outfit and his half-brother, Michael Mickey Marcello, as they faced charges for racketeering, conspiracy, loan sharking, running illegal gambling schemes, and 18 separate counts of unaliving people. Marcello's bid for freedom saw him offering a staggering $12.5 million worth of homes and bond collateral, a desperate attempt thwarted by the US District Judge. The former boss is now serving a life sentence in solitary at, you guessed it, the ADX Florida Supermax facility. Speaking of which, number 3 is Thomas Silverstein, America's most isolated man. This dude just can't seem to stop offing people. Thomas Silverstein's life in prison began at 19 for armed robbery, and he was sent to San Quentin. After some more crimes, he landed in Leavenworth, Kansas with a 15-year sentence, and in 1980 he earned a life sentence for eliminating an inmate who wouldn't be a pawn in his substance distribution scheme. He moved to USP Marion, enduring extreme solitary confinement, but nevertheless he was accused of another murder in 81 and got another life sentence, leading to his feud with rival gang member Raymond Lee Cadillac Smith, who he also eventually assassinated as the guards did nothing to keep the two apart. Then, after that, he orchestrated a guard's assassination and faced more life sentences. The guard's assassination served as the final straw, leading to a 23-year lockdown at the prison and inspiring a whole new prison design. Silverstein spent 36 years in solitary there, passing away as the longest held prisoner in the Bureau of Prisons. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who, along with his brother Tamerlan, orchestrated the infamous and devastating Boston Marathon. The brothers placed pressure cooker near the finish line, causing 3 people to lose their lives and astounding 281 others to be injured in the aftermath. Just 3 days later, after their faces were revealed to the public thanks to CCTV footage, they fatally assassinated MIT police officer Sean Collier, not because they were identified, but because they wanted to steal his firearm. Then they hijacked an SUV and engaged in a wild with the police, even throwing at them. As Dzhokhar was trying to escape law enforcement, he drove over his own brother, dragging him under the stolen SUV about 30 feet. His brother didn't survive, and Dzhokhar abandoned the SUV and vanished on foot into the night, triggering an unprecedented manhunt of epic proportions. He was eventually discovered hiding in a boat in a Watertown backyard not far from where he had ditched the SUV. Inside the boat, scribbled on the cabin wall with a pen, the bomber left a note claiming the responsibility for the marathon attack, citing vengeance for US military actions in Afghanistan and Iraq. It coldly referred to the innocent victims as collateral damage, drawing eerie parallels to the casualties of war. He even expressed complete lack of remorse for having unalived his own brother. Ultimately, justice caught up with Tsarnaev. He faced trial where he's convicted of a staggering 30 counts, and his fate was sealed with a sentence of capital punishment. At number 1 is Clara Homolka, who gets the top spot for being Canadian. Sure doesn't make me proud. Back in the late 1990s, Clara Homolka and her partner in crime, Paul Bernardo, engaged in some truly heinous acts, responsible for the demise of not 1, not 2, but 3 innocent women, one of whom happened to be Clara's own sister, Tammy. Now, once her co-conspirator got nabbed by the authorities in '83, Clara decided to switch gears and claim that she was actually dragged into this nightmare against her will, painting herself as the unwilling accomplice. She then struck a deal that landed her a relatively lenient sentence of 12 years, and all she had to do was spill the beans on Paul. Jump back to the year 2007, and guess who's back on the streets? That's right, you guys, she didn't need to escape prison because, well, they let her out onto the streets willy-nilly. Number 10 is Damien Echols, who, relatively speaking, didn't spend very long compared to the other people in this list, but I really wanted to cover him anyway. In the annals of history, some individuals have endured the most harrowing and protracted experiences of solitary confinement, with their stories revealing the astonishing resilience of the human spirit. One such figure is Damien Wayne Echols, a name entrenched into the unsettling chronicles of wrongful conviction. Echols, initially a misfit in West Memphis, Arkansas, became infamous for his unconventional attire and affinity for heavy metal music and dark poetry. In 1993, at the tender age of 18, he, along with Jesse Miskelly, were accused and convicted of the heinous unalivings of 3 younglings. Sentenced to unaliving by lethal injection in '94, Echols spent his days on unalive row in the Varner Unit Supermax, where he embarked on a transformative journey. His quest for enlightenment led him to Buddhism, with hours of daily meditation. Later, he delved into ceremonial magic, dedicating most of his 18-year sentence to its study. In 2010, new DNA evidence finally emerged, casting doubt on their guilt. After years of legal battles, Echols and his co-defendants were granted an evidentiary, eventually negotiated to an Alford plea in 2011, securing their release after 18 years and 75 days behind bars in total isolation. Echols' ordeal serves as a poignant reminder of the indomitable human spirit and the pursuit of justice in the face of adversity. And number 9 is Thomas Silverstein, often dubbed America's most isolated man, who endured an astonishing 28 years of no human contact during his 42-year prison sentence. His journey from initial imprisonment for armed robbery to a life without parole sentence for the brutal unaliving of 2 prisoners and a prison guard is a stark testament to the extreme consequences of his actions. In a legal battle against the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Silverstein argued that his prolonged solitary confinement violated constitutional laws on cruel and unusual punishment. Silverstein's account of his isolation paints a grim picture. A minuscule cell with unyielding steel walls, blinding artificial light that make that insistently buzzing noise 24 hours a day. He lacked basic privileges like social visits, reading materials, or even a sense of time, leaving him disoriented and trapped in a never-ending, timeless void. His outdoor recreation provided no solace, offering only a desolate landscape devoid of interaction. While his circumstances seemed nightmarish, it's essential to remember uncovered the horrific crimes he committed and his association with the gangs he was in. If you're enjoying the video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Most Amazing, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 is Luis Felipe. Luis Felipe is a man who found himself in a unique and deeply disturbing situation in the American prison system. As the founder of the New York chapter of the Latin Kings gang, Luis Felipe was no stranger to criminal activity. His initial incarceration was a result of numerous criminal conspiracy charges, but it was his actions behind bars that would lead to an extraordinary sentence. Unlike most cases where solitary confinement is used as a disciplinary measure, the judge in Luis Felipe's case ordered an astonishing 45-year sentence to be served entirely in solitary confinement. Prolonged solitary confinement is widely recognized as a form of torture by the United Nations and numerous countries. In this instance, Felipe was not only isolated from the general prison population, but also prevented from interacting with anyone except his attorney and non-existent close family. This unprecedented decision paints a stark picture of the extreme measures taken within the justice system, raising questions about the psychological toll such isolation can inflict on an individual. Number 7 is Mark David Chapman. Mark David Chapman's chilling act of violence, forever intertwined in the tragic loss of John Lennon, offers a glimpse into the unsettling world of long-term solitary confinement. Chapman's delusional beliefs and violent actions not only took the life of a music legend, but also condemned him to an isolated existence within the prison system. While not the traditional solitary confinement that many might imagine, Chapman's situation is one of partial isolation. This means that he's separated from the general prison population, but still permitted access to certain privileges like the library. This unique arrangement is a reflection of the genuine concerns for his safety, given the intense emotions Lennon's unaliving stirred among fans. At number 6 is Herman Wallace, a man whose story is a stark reminder of the harrowing turmoil that solitary confinement can exact on the human psyche. Convicted of bank robbery in 1971, Wallace found himself serving a 50-year sentence at Angola prison, where he would cross paths with Albert Woodfrox, setting in motion the tragic saga of the Angola Three. Without a shred of concrete evidence, Wallace and Woodfox were unjustly convicted of the unaliving of a prison guard. Wallace endured a staggering 42 years in solitary confinement, an unimaginable feat of endurance. His spirit remained unbroken even as his health deteriorated. A debilitating case of liver disease became his cruel companion. Driven by the relentless efforts of his family and activists, Wallace was finally granted release to savor 3 precious days of freedom before succumbing to liver disease failure. His story stands as a haunting testament to the inhumanity of prolonged solitary confinement, a chapter in history that should never be forgotten.
Things off with Robert Maudsley. This guy is the longest serving British prisoner in solitary confinement. Robert Maudsley's story is pretty chilling. He's known by a couple different fun nicknames that may give you a pretty good idea about the type of guy he is. Hannibal the Cannibal, Brain Eater. Yeah, wonder what he did to earn those titles. So in the 70s, Maudsley took the lives of at least 4 men, 3 of them in prison after being convicted for the first. Now, Maudsley was obviously a dangerous guy, but in his defense, his victims were not the best people. In fact, many would consider them the scum of the earth. So we almost have a bit of a Dexter situation on our hands, if anyone remembers that show. Regardless of how awful his victims were themselves, though, it was clear this guy was a bit of a danger to the other prisoners, and in 1983 he was placed in solitary, where he's been for most of his time behind bars. He spends around 23 hours a day alone in a cell. Oh, and the Brain Eater nickname, apparently there's a rumor that he may have consumed part of the brain of one of his victims, but it's not 100% known if that's true or not. Next up, we have Charles Bronson. Not Death Wish Charles Bronson, but the British dude. This guy is a whole different kind of character. His real name is Michael Peterson, but he's better known as Charles Bronson, named after the actor. This guy has spent a ton of his life behind bars, and he's kind of infamous for being a troublemaker in prison. He's been in and out of jail since the 70s for all sorts of stuff. He's got quite the reputation. Bronson has spent a good chunk of his time in solitary, like a lot. And I mean, we're talking about a guy who's known known for his violent outbursts and all that, so they kind of couldn't figure out what to do with him, so they just stuck him in isolation. Now, being in solitary for anyone is tough, but for a guy like Bronson, who's already got a reputation for being a bit unhinged, it's a whole other level of crazy. He's become kind of a controversial figure because some people see him as a victim of the system, while others think he's just brought it all on himself with his wild behavior. In terms of what he did, he first landed himself in jail for armed robbery, but he also had a hobby of fighting prison guards, or just anyone. Dude just loves to fight. If you want to watch a wild movie, check out Bronson, starring Tom Hardy as the titular Charles Bronson. Pretty awesome movie. Next on the list, we have the Angola Three. So these were three guys, Albert Woodfox, Herman Wallace, and Robert King, stuck in the Louisiana State Penitentiary, also known as Angola Prison. They spent an insane amount of time in solitary confinement, most of their adult lives, a little over 40 years. So Woodfox and Wallace got thrown in solitary in the 70s for taking the life of a prison guard. The thing is, there are a lot of people who believe they were set up because they were Black Panthers fighting for better conditions in the prison. Then there's Robert King, who was in solitary for 29 years for a crime he apparently didn't even do. He finally got released when they found out he was innocent. These guys endured extreme isolation in tiny cells, barely seeing the light of day. In the end, Albert Woodfox got out in 2016 after striking a deal, but Herman Wallace died just days after his release. Next on the list, we have Stephen Slevin. If you want to talk about neglect, this next case is pretty much the definition. His story is a bit different from the usual tough guy prison tales. Slevin was just a regular guy who hit a bit of a rough patch in life. Back in 2005, Slevin got arrested in New Mexico for a DUI. Instead of a quick trial, things got all bungled up. He ended up stuck in jail for nearly 2 years without even getting a trial. Just sitting there, waiting. Very long time to be sitting around. And to make matters worse, he spent a big chunk of that time in solitary confinement, alone in a tiny cell for close to 2 years. Little to no human contact, no fresh air. By the time they finally sorted out his case, Slevin, as you could probably imagine, was in pretty bad shape, mentally and physically. He later sued the county, and in 2013, he got a settlement for around 15 million bucks, but he passed away not long after that. Alright, let's bring it back to the scarier side though, with Edmund Kemper, someone who is exactly where he should be, away from everyone else. So Kemper was this big, imposing dude. He's kind of like a real-life Jason Voorhees. He stood at 6'9" and had a very chilling intelligence about him. It's a bad combo, ill-intentioned and smart. Not great. He had a twisted relationship with his family, especially his mom, and this messed up dynamic played a big role in what he ended up doing. From 1972 to 1973, Kemper took the lives of several young women, and the details of the crimes are pretty horrific. He would do some gruesome stuff to the victims' bodies afterward. Not only that, but he also ended the life of his own mother and his grandparents years before. Now, when they finally caught him, Kemper actually confessed to everything. It was almost like he wanted to make sure he'd never get out. He actually wanted the death penalty, but capital punishment had been suspended in California, so he received 8 consecutive life sentences, and he spent almost his entire time in prison in solitary confinement. In interviews, he's talked about how he waived his right to parole because he believed he deserved to stay in that small cell. Next up, we have Thomas Silverstein. Silverstein was an American convict, very high-profile inmate who spent a significant part of his life in solitary confinement. He was born in 1952, and he landed himself in prison for armed robbery. He spent the rest of his life in the slammer after a series of violent incidents while in prison. He took the lives of 3 prisoners while he was involved with the Aryan Brotherhood, beginning with a man named Danny Atwell. For this, he received a full life sentence. Eventually, he took the life of a prison guard, Merle Klutz, at the Marion Penitentiary in Illinois in 1983. After that, he was placed in solitary confinement, and he would become one of the most isolated prisoners in the United States. He spent almost 36 years in solitary, mostly in a specially designed cell at the federal prison in Florence, Colorado, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. In his isolated cell, he had minimal human contact, limited access to the outside world, and strict restrictions on communication. Next on the list is Richard Lee McNair. This guy is crafty, honestly, kind of impressive. It's no wonder he's in solitary confinement. If they don't keep their eyes on this guy, he'll just find a way to slip away. He was convicted after a botched robbery. One man was severely injured while the other died. McNair was responsible, of course, and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But he managed to escape or come close to multiple times. His first attempt was in 1988. He managed to actually wiggle out of his handcuffs using lip balm. Another time he escaped through an air vent. They caught him a few days later. But this would not be the final incident. In 2006, he pulled off a Houdini level move by mailing himself out of a federal penitentiary in Louisiana. Yes, he got himself packaged and mailed away. Authorities found him a few blocks away, and this is almost even more impressive. He actually managed to convince them that he was just a jogger. For months, he was on the run. He used stolen identities and even managed to make his way into Canada, but eventually they nabbed him in 2007. Jack Henry Abbott. This guy had a rebellious streak that landed him in some serious trouble behind bars. Abbott was a convict and writer. He had this intense correspondence with author Norman Mailer from prison, which turned into the book In the Belly of the Beast. Abbott was no stranger to prison. He spent most of his life there for different crimes, but he had this knack for just making things worse and worse for himself. His rebellious behavior got him thrown into solitary confinement more than once. Imagine being stuck in a tiny cell all alone because he just couldn't play by the rules. Abbott seemed like he just couldn't help himself. This pattern continued even after his book got attention. People started talking about him. Just over a month after his release and the book is out and everything, in 1981, he stabbed a waiter at a New York City cafe, died of his injuries, and so Abbott was sent right back to prison and eventually took his own life in 2002. Next up is a guy who totally deserved to be isolated from the rest of the world, Robert Hansen. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this guy before. He did some incredibly disturbing stuff to women. The details are pretty horrific. He took the lives of at least 17 women, and he'd take his time. He'd often let his victims run off into the woods, giving them a chance to think they'd escape, and then he'd hunt them down like wild animals. Luckily, though, he ended up in prison. Now, here's the thing. He wasn't exactly Mr. Popular among the other inmates, as you can probably imagine, considering what he did, and because of that, they separated him from the rest of the inmates. Solitary confinement. And on one hand, yeah, this is a good thing. Solitary confinement does sound like absolute hell, which is where this guy belonged. But it is kind of frustrating knowing that he was put in solitary for his own protection. I don't know, it just seems kind of gross to me. And finally, we have Eileen Wuornos. Wuornos had a rough life from the get-go. Honestly, it would have been far more shocking if she grew up to be a well-adjusted member of society. She had a string of just horrible experiences that eventually led her down a dark path. Basically, her humanity was gone, turning her completely into this cold-blooded and remorseless person. From 1989 to 1990, Eileen went on a spree targeting men in Florida while working on the streets. She would shoot her clients and then rob them, often claiming that it was done in self-defense. Eileen spent around 10 years on death row, and during this time, she was housed in a small cell, isolated from the general prison population with minimal recreational activities and restricted access to the outside world. She finally died by lethal injection in 2002.
At number 5 is Jesse Pomeroy. Born in 1859, he might not hold the record for longest time spent in solitary, but his story is a chilling tale of a young boy turned vicious predator. Pomeroy's reign of terror began in 1871 when he lured young boys from the outskirts of Charlestown and subjected them to brutal confrontations involving belts, fists, and blades. While none of his victims perished, the violence was shocking to say the least. What's truly disturbing is that when Pomeroy's family moved to Boston, the attacks ceased in Charlestown but resumed in the new location. He was eventually captured and sentenced to prison until the age of 18. Shockingly, he was paroled at the tender age of 14, only to have another girl go missing and the mangled body of yet another individual discovered by the river shortly after his return home. Despite a lack of concrete evidence, I mean, the timing is kind of paints the picture, suspicion immediately fell on Pomeroy. He adamantly refused to confess, but the police eventually unearthed missing individually in his basement. Although it's suspected that he may have taken even more lives, no additional bodies were found. Pomeroy would go on to spend an astonishing 57 years behind bars, with the first 41 of those years spent in solitary confinement before being released into the general prison population. During this long, lonely incarceration, he taught himself languages, reportedly becoming fluent in German, a skill he honed in solitude. At number 4 is Robert Strode, infamous as the Birdman of Alcatraz. He endured one of history's lengthiest periods of solitary confinement. A life marked by turbulence and brutality led him down a dark path. At just 13, he fled home, ultimately becoming a brothel keeper by 18. In 1909, an altercation resulted in Strode ending a man's life, leading to a 12-year federal prison sentence. Inside the prison walls, his reputation for violence persisted. In 1916, he fatally impaled guard, initially earning a unaliving sentence, later commuted to life imprisonment. Amidst the darkness, an unlikely glimmer of humanity emerged. While at Leavenworth, Strode discovered an injured bird, sparking a passion for keeping it alive. His meticulous care for birds and groundbreaking research on aviation diseases earned him respect in the ornithological community. Yet, despite his newfound purpose, Strode's explosive temper and violent tendencies consigned him to solitary confinement, where he spent his days alone, finding solace only in the company of the birds he cared for. Number 3 is Robert Maudsley. Few stories are as chilling as that of Robert Maudsley, the man known as Hannibal the Man-Eater. Imagine spending nearly half a century in solitary confinement, locked away from the world for the majority of your existence. Maudsley's tale is one of unparalleled isolation, darkness, and infamy. Maudsley, hailing from Britain, achieved the dubious distinction of being the longest serving inmate in the country, with a staggering 49 years behind bars. But what truly sets him apart is the mind-numbing fact that he spent nearly 45 of those years, accounting to a mind-boggling 16,000 consecutive days, that he spent in solitary confinement. His existence was confined to his cell, where he grappled with the ghosts of his past and with the grim reality of his present. His reputation as Hannibal the Man-Eater stemmed from a gruesome crime committed within the walls of the Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital. Allegedly, he tormented a fellow patient for a gruesome 9 hours, eventually displaying the lifeless patient to shocked guard. The description of the victim's head, which was cracked open like a boiled egg, with a spoon protruding, left an indelible mark on Maudsley's notoriety, despite his denials of actually engaging in consuming the flesh of that individual. At number 2 is Keith Lamar. Keith Lamar's story is a haunting tale of extreme isolation and resilience. After a tragic event in his youth, he found himself in the unforgiving clutches of the penal system. But it was when he was sentenced to unaliving after being convicted of 5 inmate unalivings during the Lucasville uprising that his journey into the depths of solitary confinement truly began. For an astonishing 27 years, Lamar existed in his nightmarish world of isolation within the Supermax prison in Ohio. His world was confined to a room barely larger than a bathroom, with a mere crack in the wall as his tenuous link to outside. In that suffocating space, he endured 23 hours of solitude every day. Yet amidst this relentless isolation, Lamar's spirit endured. He and fellow inmates fought for their humanity, sparking change within the prison system itself. Their hunger strike in 2011 led to small but meaningful victories, such as the right to hug their family members during visits, breaking through the cold barrier of the plexiglass. And number 1 is Albert Woodfox. Albert Woodfox's story, a tale of unparalleled resilience in the face of extreme adversity, sheds light on the harrowing realities of prolonged solitary confinement. Incarcerated in '65 for armed robbery, Woodfox, alongside Herman Wallace and Robert King, the Angola Three, endured years of isolation at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, ironically located at a former plantation. Woodfox spent 43 years confined to a 6-by-9-foot cell, subjected to claustrophobia, gas attacks, confrontations, and other forms of torment. His determination to resist inhumane conditions and unconstitutional treatment remained unyielding. Amidst his torment, Woodfox educated himself and fellow inmates, teaching them to read and write. His activism extended beyond prison walls, protesting deplorable conditions, racial injustice, and exploitative labor practices. His release in 2016 at the age of 69, marked a turning point, with his advocacy against solitary confinement continued. Woodfox's legacy is a testament to the indomitable human spirit, demonstrating that even in the darkest circumstances, hope and determination can endure, refusing to let prison staff define one's identity and beliefs. While some of these prisoners were eventually released and became advocates for criminal justice reform, their experiences continue to serve as stark reminder of the psychological and physiological toll that extreme isolation can take on individuals. And is Jose Antonio Acosta Hernandez, aka El Diego. If evil is a measure of your body count, then Jose here tops the leaderboards. El Diego is the former leader of La Línea, the leading faction of the Juarez cartel. Originally established as a team of heavily armed ex and active duty police officers, this unit has evolved into the enforcement arm of the cartel, safeguarding narcotics traffickers from the criminal underworld. In 2012, Hernandez himself was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 20 years for his involvement in a litany of crimes, including racketeering, narcotics trafficking, money laundering, and of course the Big M. And that M is big indeed, as Hernandez has confessed to orchestrating or partaking in over 1,500 unalivings between 2008 and 2012 alone. Hernandez finds himself serving not 1, not 2, but 3 consecutive life sentences plus an additional 20 years. His new permanent home is the ominous and supremely fortified confines of the ADX Florence Supermax facility, touted as the most secure correctional facility on the planet, even above maximum security prisons. Here, Hernandez resides in solitary confinement, as do all prisoners at ADX Florence, where he'll spend the rest of his days sitting with the consequences of his malevolent actions. If you're enjoying the video so far, you can support the channel by pressing the like button, subscribing to Most Amazing Top 10, and ringing that notification bell. Those who do can rest easy knowing that they're nowhere near as evil as number 9, Terry Nicholas. Terry Nicholas, American domestic terrorist, infamous for his role in 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. Born on April 1st, 1995, Nicholas had an array of short-term jobs from farming to real estate before a fateful encounter with Timothy McVeigh during a stint in the US Army. The alliance culminated in the tragedy of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building on April 19, 1995, claiming 186 lives. In 1997, Nicholas was found guilty in a federal trial on charges including conspiracy to use weapon of mass destruction and involuntary man unaliving, which stemmed from the tragic demise of federal law enforcement personnel. Although the plaintiff sought the capital punishment, aka the unalive penalty, the jury couldn't reach a consensus, and so instead he served a life sentence without parole. He also faced state charges during yet another trial in Oklahoma, where he was convicted of a staggering 161 counts of first-degree unaliving, arson, and conspiracy, but yet again the state jury was unable to decide on whether to impose capital punishment. As a result, he's serving 161 consecutive life sentences at ADX Florence in Colorado. On the other hand, his co-conspirator Timothy McVeigh, who planned and carried out the whole wasn't so lucky. McVeigh was executed in 2001. At number 8 is Luis Felipe, aka King Blood. Hailing from Havana, Cuba, Felipe made his way to the United States during the Mariel boat lift of 1990, an event famously depicted in Scarface. Among the so-called undesirables sent to the US was Luis Felipe, who would end up in Chicago where he would first come into contact with the notorious Latin King street gang. Fast forward to 1986 and he moved to the Big Apple, where he founded the New York chapter of the Latin Kings. But eventually Luis Felipe was arrested on unaliving charges after he unalived his girlfriend while under the influence, serving 9 years at the Collins Correctional Facility in New York, but the tale only gets darker from here. See, in 95, he found himself convicted of orchestrating multiple unalivings from behind bars, penning the orders to fellow Latin kings on the outside. This led to his sentencing of life imprisonment, plus an additional 45 years served in strict solitary confinement with absolutely zero communication with the outside world. Currently, King Blood resides in the notorious ADX Florence. At number 7 is Caboni Savage, whose name isn't just fitting, it's an understatement. Emerging as a dealer in Hunting Park, Savage ascended to become a kingpin, orchestrating the distribution of vast quantities of nose powder throughout North Philadelphia from 98 to 04. Savage's malevolence escalated when he was accused of personally slaying a stranger. Notably, he even ordered hits on competitors and adversaries, including orchestrating the demise of a rival dealer, Carlton Brown. His ruthless grip extended to intimidation, with threats aimed at witnesses' families, but unfortunately those threats turned out to be promises. Enter Eugene Twin Coleman, once in cahoots with Savage, who testified against Savage in a narcotics trial, leading to Savage's conviction. Savage retaliated by orchestrating the arson of Marcella Coleman's house, and the claimed 6 lives. Caboni Savage ended up receiving 13 consecutive unaliving sentences, while Lewis was only given a 40-year sentence on account of the stark differences on the level of remorsefulness displayed during their testimonies.
Number 5, Chris Watts. Chris Watts is a notorious criminal from Colorado who killed a pregnant wife and 2 daughters. In August of 2018, he pleaded guilty to 9 counts of unlawful termination of a pregnancy and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. He'd been having an affair with a coworker before the and stated in interviews that he wanted to leave his family for her. On August 13th of 2018, Chris killed his pregnant wife and 2 daughters by asphyxiating them to death in their own home. After killing his family, he disposed of their bodies in oil tanks on the grounds of the property where he worked. The case gained worldwide attention and prompted investigations into the family's background and past. Chris received 5 life sentences in November of 2018 and is currently serving his sentence at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. Now, he's one of the most infamous criminals in recent history, and quite the example of how seemingly normal people can commit heinous crimes. Number 4, John Childs. John Childs, also known as Bruce Childs, is a British hitman and serial from East London who was convicted in 1979 for a series of apparent contract and none of the bodies have been found to this day. He confessed to having committed crimes to Detective Chief Superintendent Frank Cater in June of 1979 after he was arrested in September of 1978 for a series of bank and security van robberies in Hertfordshire. The investigation was based at Waltham Abbey Police Station in Essex, where John was convicted of carrying out the deaths of Terence Terry Eve, Robert Brown, George Brett, Terry Brett, Frederick Freddie Sherwood, and Ronald Andrews from November of 1974 to October of 1978. Also, the weapons for these haven't been found yet, which is just as scary when you think about the skill level for hiding all of that. Number 3, Robert Maudsley. Robert John Maudsley is an Englishman convicted of multiple. He killed 4 people, with one of the taking place in a psychiatric hospital and 2 in prison after receiving a life sentence for previous. As a teenager during the late 1960s, Robert sought out psychiatric help after several life-ending attempts, and it was during his talk with doctors that he claimed to hear voices telling him to kill parents. In 1974, Robert garroted John Farrell in Wood Green, London, and soon after surrendered himself to police, saying he needed psychiatric help. He was found unfit to stand trial and instead was sent to Broadmoor Hospital. In 1977, he and another patient, David Cheeseman, who at the time was serving a sentence for sexual crimes, locked themselves in a cell with a third patient named David Francis, who committed crimes I can't even say on here. The duo punished David Francis to death over a period of 9 hours, and after this incident, Maudsley was convicted of manslaughter and sent to Wakefield Prison. In 1978, he killed 2 fellow prisoners at Wakefield in one day, even though he had originally set out to kill 7. You know, underachieving. So yeah, if you value your life, maybe transfer out of that jail if you're there. Number 2, Arthur Hutchinson. So Arthur is a convicted triple. Born in Hartlepool, County Durham, he attained notoriety in 1984 when he was convicted of the committed in Dore, Sheffield, South Yorkshire on the 23rd of October in 1983. He remains in prison and since 2008 has made a number of legal challenges to try and overturn his life sentence. Now, he had already spent more than 5 years in prison for the attempted killing of his half-brother, Dino, before that fateful day in 1983 when he arrived at Selby Police Station after being arrested on suspicion of theft, burglary, and sexual harm. He has to go to the washroom, and while he was there, jumped out of a window in an attempt to escape and cut his knee on barbed wire. After 3.5 weeks on the run, Hutchison broke into the home of Basil Leitner, his wife, and their son via, a patio window and impaled all 3 of them to death. After spending another 2 weeks on the run, wearing disguises and moving from place to place in Barnsley and many other places that I cannot pronounce, he was finally caught on a farm in Hartlepool on November 5th of 1983. During his trial on September 11th of 1984, he accused Mike Barron, then a reporter with the Sunday Mirror, of committing said crimes. Hutchinson was found guilty of all accusations, though, on September 14th after a 4-hour deliberation and sentenced to life in prison. Number 1, Luca Magnotta. So for some context, Jun Lin, also known as Justin, arrived in Canada back in 2010 with the intention of starting a new life and, to study computer engineering and settle down in Quebec. He was living with a man for a period of time as an openly gay man here in Canada, but sadly wasn't out to his parents, who were pressuring him to settle down and marry a woman, and tension from this caused him to break up with his boyfriend. I promise, it's relevant. After breaking up with his boyfriend, Lin had been using Grindr and other web applications to meet with men, and through a Craigslist ad, he met Luca Magnotta, and sadly, that's where this tale goes sour. Lin was last seen on May 24th of 2012 when his friends reported getting a text message from him around 9 p.m. 3 of his friends went into his apartment on May 27th after not hearing from him and reported him missing on the 29th. On May 25th, an 11-minute video titled "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick" was uploaded online depicting a naked male tied to a bed frame being repeatedly impaled with what was later established to be a screwdriver and a kitchen stabby implement, then dismembered, followed by acts of necrophilia. The perpetrator used that kitchen device and a fork to cut off some flesh, and police have seen a longer version of the video where acts of people munching were committed. Several hours after Lynn, Magnotta booked a round-trip ticket for a flight from Montreal to Paris using a passport with his own name. Police confirmed on May 30th that the video was sadly authentic and identified Lynn as the victim. On June 13th of 2012, the four limbs and torso that had been mailed to various political parties were matched to Lynn using DNA samples from his family. On July 1st, his head was recovered at the edge of a small lake in Montreal's Anguigon Park after police received an anonymous tip. Going back to June 4th though, Magnotta was finally apprehended by Berlin police at an internet cafe while reading news stories about himself after quite the manhunt. He tried giving fake names before admitting who he was, and his identity was confirmed through fingerprint evidence. He's been sentenced to life in prison, and thank goodness for that.